It's easier than ever to ace the LSAT because LSAT has removed the logic game section. What this means is there's less material for you to study. You can just double down on logical reasoning and reading comp. Today, I'll walk you through how to ace those two sections. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. However, it was a lot harder for me to improve my score by 23 points than it should have been because I got stuck in the minutia trap. There are roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions, and I got obsessed with memorizing the proper approaches and the strategies for each of them, even though they're not all equally important. Some show up more often than others. Beyond that, it's not just about question stem type. It turns out that if you actually understand the method of reasoning in the stimulus and you take the time to understand what you're reading, the question becomes a whole lot easier. You're not going to be able to strengthen an argument or weaken an argument or identify the underlying necessary assumption of the argument if you don't know what the argument is saying. And so if you slow down and focus on the method of reasoning in the stimulus, you don't need to memorize all those 15 different question types, and logical reasoning becomes a whole lot easier. The reason I'm focusing on logical reasoning to start with is that it's now 2/3 of the test, meaning it should take up roughly 2/3 of your LSAT prep time, all else being equal, and I would focus on this before getting into reading comprehension. Now, let's say you've been studying for a while, you've already identified some particular weak areas with regard to certain LSAT question types, and you've discovered that you're stronger at others. What you can do is you can manipulate the question to transform it from a question type that you don't like to one that you do like based on the method of reasoning in the stimulus. This is one of the tactics that we use at LSAT Unplugged as part of our Socratic review method to help you better understand the argument or the passage, then understand the question stem, then understand the answer choices. Meaning, as a drill, if you could take the time to understand the question from the test maker's perspective, you can understand that it's not just about the question stem type. You could imagine that one person writes the argument and yet another person decides what the answer choices should look like. And so if we dissect the question and we say, okay, let's take it bit by bit, divide and conquer, what's the argument saying? What is the appropriate question stem to apply here that we want to use? And then how would the answer choices change in accordance with what the new question type will be? And so we look at, where are your misunderstandings coming from? Are they in the argument? Are they in the question stem, the proper perspective from which to view it? Or are they in the answer choices? Is it a tempting wrong answer? Or is it an unappealing right answer? What makes the wrong answer choice tempting for you? And what ultimately makes it wrong? What makes the right answer choice unappealing? And what ultimately makes it correct? Because you have these traps of encouragement towards the wrong answer and traps of discouragement away from the right answer. And until you better understand which tricks and traps you personally are uniquely prone to falling for, you may end up making the same mistake again. And of course, that's what we want to help you avoid. And we walk you through this process through our live online classes via Zoom, our on-demand video courses, our small group coaching, and our one-on-one coaching programs. If you're interested in finding out more, you can check out the links below to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Now, of course, everything I've shared here is regardless of the LSAT logical reasoning question stem type. There are also some foundational elements you're going to want to make sure that you're clear on as well. For example, conditional indicators for necessary and sufficient, indicators for evidence at conclusion. These will carry you far. If you don't know them, you're in trouble, of course. So you want to master the core fundamentals before drilling questions by type. And when you do get into drilling questions by type, if you do, focus on the three most common types to begin with: necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Start there before tackling the less common types like evaluate the argument or cannot be true. And I'll share a quick tip for each of these three types. First of all, you want to make sure that you're crystal clear on the difference between necessary assumption questions and sufficient assumption questions. They are asking for very different things. And even some LSAT prep companies are confused and lump them together under the catch-all category of assumption questions. This is a huge mistake because what works for one of these types will not work for the other type. For example, for necessary assumption questions, you can use the so-called negation or denial test, by which you run through each of the choices, negate them, and the correct choice, when negated, will destroy the argument, demonstrating that it in fact needed to be true in order for the argument to work. This works great for necessary assumption questions, but will not work reliably for sufficient assumption questions. And so you want to make sure that you understand how to properly distinguish between the two types. With regard to inference questions, there are two categories you want to look at: must be true versus most strongly supported. Must be true questions require that it is 100% supported by the stimulus. However, most strongly supported questions are simply asking for something that is incredibly likely to be the case based on the stimulus, but is not necessarily 100% guaranteed. Now, for flaw questions, you want to remember that your task here is to identify the flaw in the stimulus. That's it. Simply articulate what is already there. You are not looking to destroy the argument. You are simply looking for what is already there to articulate what is already contained within the stimulus. In contrast, weakened questions are simply asking you to expose a gap in the argument to make the conclusion relatively less likely given the evidence, but you are not looking to destroy the argument or point out a fundamental flaw contained within the argument, simply to problematize it, maybe even just a little bit. Now, of course, I don't want to leave you hanging here. I do want to cover reading comprehension as well. So I'll share some strategies for the reading comp section also. And I do find that a lot of students struggle with reading comp. Some students say you can't learn it, that you can't improve. They, of course, are wrong. Even some LSAT prep companies over the years have said it's not worth studying because you can't improve. They're all wrong. I'm going to share with you how you can ace the LSAT reading comp section. The secret is often doing less. I personally realized that I did better at reading comprehension when I did less work up front, when I took fewer notes, when I did less highlighting, because it takes time to write things down, it takes time to read things, and the notes that you take may end up not even being useful to help you solve the questions. And on the online LSAT, now that it's on the computer, you're limited to using their highlighting and underlining tools within the platform, but these tools are glitchy and unreliable. I would not want you using them. If you are using some private prep company's platform, you may be in for a rude awakening on test day when you discover that the highlighting and underlining tools in Prometric or in LawHub actually work less well than the ones that the prep companies have developed. And so don't rely on something that may not even work for you on test day itself. Now, zooming out a bit from test day itself, going back to your beginnings of your LSAT prep journey with reading comp, people will often say, to get better at reading comp, read magazines like Scientific American or The Economist. And if you're taking the LSAT a year or two from now, that's fine. I don't see a problem with that. The thing is that there are roughly 400 actual official released reading comp passages. And if you're taking the LSAT in 6 months or less, it is quite unlikely that you're going to have time to get through all 400 of them. So my question is, why would you prioritize non-LSAT material like The Economist at the expense of covering actual official reading comp passages? Why don't you print out some reading comp passages for some casual reading, reading on your commute, beach reading, bathroom reading, bedtime reading to help you fall asleep, instead of reading these magazines? Because the thing is that hardly anybody is reading The Economist or Scientific American because they have to. They're reading it because they like to. In contrast, LSAT reading comp passages are written specifically by LSAC to make them boring, to make them analogous to the legalese that you will be looking at in law school and as an attorney. They've increased the difficulty level to make it less engaging. They've increased the complexity of the sentence structure and the vocabulary to make it harder to get a handle on it, whereas popular media is written to be consumer friendly, written at typically a middle school level or easier. And you could calculate this for yourself by copy pasting these passages or articles into an app to get their readability score to show you the difference between the two types of media. Now, when you are approaching an LSAT reading comp passage, I recommend focusing on the big picture, the main idea, the primary purpose. Start there, get down the main idea, the details, the supporting examples. You can always go back to find them when you need to help you solve a particular question. So notice my approach is quite minimalistic in contrast to the LSAT prep textbooks, what they're advocating, because the thing is that although their strategies may sound great in theory, they typically don't work within the strict time constraints of the LSAT. Remember that with standard timing, you have only 8 minutes and 45 seconds to read each passage and solve all the 7 or 8 questions associated with that passage. So point being, less is more. Get the big picture, solve the general global questions, then do the detail-oriented questions that require going back to the passage, and finally save the more inferential questions that require reading between the lines for last. Now, of course, we cover reading comp every single week in our live small group classes. You can focus on it in our one-on-one coaching programs to help you better develop your own personalized approach for reading comprehension. Again, link below to find out more and to book a call. We'd be glad to help you out. But no matter what your approach is, you may find it useful to engage in some drills where you just extract the main idea from the passage. I mentioned earlier, there are roughly 400 actual official released reading comp passages that you could study from. You could reserve the first 100 of those passages just for drills where you read the passage and solve only the main idea or the general global questions associated with that passage, just to increase your ability, to increase that muscle, to strengthen that muscle for identifying the main idea, the main point, the central purpose, the author's opinion of the passage. You could also try rewriting the entire passage in simpler language, as if you were going to explain it to a 5-year-old, in order to prove to yourself that you truly understand what it's saying. Because when I ask a student, explain to me what this argument is saying, or explain to me what this passage is saying, and they just reread word for word what the argument or the passage is saying, I'm like, well, you proved to me that you know how to read, but can you prove that you understand what you're reading? That requires paraphrasing accurately, which is a skill. It takes time to get there. It's not going to happen overnight. But the more you can do that, the better you can do that, the better that you can review passages and make sure that you are extracting the key insights from your review process, the more you're going to see that improvement. Because of course, we can help you out. We can explain things, but you're going to be the one who's going to be there on test day solving the questions. We're not going to be there with you. So we want to make sure that you've developed that muscle for yourself and you can prove to us that you truly understand the passage. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.